Good morning. So foggy out there. I kind of like it. It's nice. Forgive me if I'm hobbling. I was telling my class before this, I thought I was really young yesterday. Like it was at softball practice and my daughter's coach was like, we need one of the coaches to play today. I was like, I got this. Like I can play. And then all last night I was like, I need a heating pad. I hurt my leg. I feel so it made me feel old. I'm like, yeah. And then I went out there and I was like, I hit the ball and I was running the bases and halfway around, I was like, oh, like, they could pull the muscle in my leg. But anyway, so you can laugh at me. I'm laughing at me for that still a little bit. And I wrote some reminders of here, these at the end. I erased the first one because it didn't apply to our class, but I'll talk about these at the end with our exam and then Wednesday next week, just as a reminder. But what we'll do today is we'll cover chapter 10. I have to say, I enjoyed all of our conversation about the movie last time. I hope that you found it interesting too. I think it was nice to talk about it. And then we'll get through this last chapter or as much of it as we can, and then we will have our exam on Monday. So that's our plan. This whole chapter is about kind of how we respond when we're aroused. What are some of the factors that play a role in that? Looking at like the brain, our sexual responses, some sexual behaviors. So there's quite a bit of content in here. So we'll look at some of that today, kind of starting with what are some of the things that cause us to feel aroused, and what are some of the things that are happening in our body when we are turned on or aroused or interested in any kind of like sexual behaviors. And we've been talking about some of these as we've gone through, like a lot of these hormones and things should be familiar because they've been brought up before. But we're going to look at, what are some of the biological influences first. So one of the things that plays a huge role in how interested we are in sex or any kind of like intimacy and sexuality are hormones. And we talked about this previously in the anatomy unit, that testosterone plays a really big role in sex drive, right? And testosterone being that primarily male hormone, though women do have it as well, it's linked with sex drive and genital sensitivity in both men and women. And so we see testosterone playing a really big role in that, or the androgens produced by the testes and adrenal glands and ovaries. The estrogens a little bit, but not as much. It's mainly testosterone that's thought to play a role in like what motivates us to kind of pursue any kind of sexual activity. And there's another really big one as well, hormone named oxytocin. And we've talked about this one a few times as well. Oxytocin is produced in the hypothalamus and it plays a big role in our sexual response. It's released anytime we orgasm. It's released anytime we have physical contact with another person, like cuddling, holding hands, kissing. It's also released during breastfeeding and during childbirth. So it's something that really promotes like connection and closeness with another person. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the show Supernatural. It was like one of my favorite shows like ever. And I hear they're gonna maybe reboot it and do it again, which would be kind of fun. But there was a scene in there. They had like an interesting take on oxytocin. I get excited when I find like things that relate to what we're talking about. But they had this whole scene about oxytocin. They had sirens, people who were women who were sirens, and that was how they lured men into their trap through oxytocin. Have you seen this as well? But I'm glad somebody has seen it. So I found a little clip of this and I thought I would share it with you. It's just this woman who is a siren who's talking about like oxytocin, kind of connected to that is released in kind of relationships in the beginning when we're falling in love or infatuation with someone, along with a lot of other things as we talked about as well. But I liked that she was talking about it, and it was kind of a fun take that the sirens, who like if you go with like back in lore, right, would lure sailors to their death, right? They were using oxytocin in this, which I thought was kind of a funny take on this idea. So there are a lot of hormones and like biological pieces to what influences our interest in sex or our influence in sex drive. And these are a few of the big ones, primarily testosterone, and then also oxytocin. The brain also plays a really big role, right? We talked about some of these before, right? Dopamine and serotonin. Our mind, right? You can find ways to turn yourself on to be interested or not interested in sex and the thoughts that you have related to sexuality. So a lot of people, the cognition piece is a big part as well. And this is something that sometimes couples will focus on a little bit in like therapy, if maybe they have discrepancies in sex drive, which sometimes can happen and be problematic. The limbic system and our emotions can also play a big role if people have past traumas or, the mentalities and emotions associated with sexuality. And obviously, as we said, neurotransmitters. So the idea here is that really there are just so many factors that can play a role in what pushes us towards sex or maybe away from it, right? Whether they're emotional or chemical or cerebral, there are a lot of elements. And the book had this quote, and I'll read it to you. Sex can be motivated by excitement or boredom, physical need or affection, desire or or complacency. It can be a bid for power or an egalitarian exchange, a purely mechanical release granted as a reward or inducement, an altruistic offering or selfishness, insecurity, or narcissism. Sex can express almost anything and mean almost anything. So there's a lot of like complicated elements behind engaging in sexuality with another person, and it can be motivated by quite a few different factors. Touch tends to be kind of the dominant sexual sense, right? Which makes sense, right? As we're talking about, like when you touch somebody, it releases hormones and neurotransmitters. And our bodies have what are called erogenous zones in them. And some of them are very kind of naturally driven, and others kind of develop through conditioning. So primary erogenous zones are areas of the body that have a lot of nerve endings in them, right? They're naturally sensitive regions of the body because they contain dense amounts of nerve endings. So the genitals, the breast, the anus, thighs, neck, ears, mouth, and lips. I almost felt like Bridget from Trolls, and I wanted to say like teeth after it or something. Sorry, my kids have been obsessed with Trolls right now. Like for whatever reason, we're on like the Trolls garden. But primary zones that are very sensitive when you touch them. But you can also have what are called secondary zones. Through experience or conditioning, parts of your body can become arousing that maybe weren't originally. So let's say that as part of like sexual activity, maybe you give your partner a back massage, and every time you're massaging their back or their neck, it leads to sex. All of a sudden, it might be that whenever you have a back massage, you feel turned on and interested in sex, right? They become connected with each other through conditioning. Kind of a funny example, so it's kind of tangential a little bit here. But in my intro psych class, when we talk about conditioning, there was this funny study that was done where this guy would eat an onion bagel and then kiss his partner, right? So he'd eat an onion bagel, kiss his partner. Onion bagel, kiss his partner. Onion bagel, kiss his partner. And then what they did is they had somebody have an onion bagel around him, and he felt aroused and didn't understand why, right? And it was because the two had become connected through conditioning. And so it can literally be that any part of your body becomes erotic or sensitive through conditioning. And this happens a lot with like behaviors that lead up to sex. It's kind of a similar idea with like lingerie or fetishistic objects, that they become conditioned to lead to arousal. So touch plays a huge role, and so does smell, right? Pheromones a little less prominent in people than in animals, but certain odors can be very connected to sexuality. A lot of studies done on different times of the month, and men smelling women's t-shirts or men smelling women, like vice versa, and like rating smell as it connects to sexuality. You can also have smells become erotic through conditioning. Let's say that your partner always lights a candle before sex, right? And all of a sudden they go to light a candle, or the smell of the candle could be arousing for you. So there's a lot of conditioning that takes place when it comes to sexuality. It can be learned, or it can be a little more like primary and natural. So the senses play a big role, right? Whether it's touch or sound or smell or whatnot. Yeah.
Fetishes would keep like, let's say, is it like a foot fetish or something?
Yeah.
Something that's not like wearing, it's just like part of them brings kind of like desire and you don't know why. Like, is that part of secondary or?
I mean, it could be either, right? So let's say again, like, we'll talk about fetishes in a later union. And some of it's almost has to be like a cross wiring thing. Some of the cortexes in the brain are very like close to each other, and so they can kind of become crossed.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is conditioning. So maybe someone at a young age had an experience where they saw something related to shoes or feet, and it was arousing in some way, which they may or may not remember, right? And so it could be that you have a foot fetish because of something that happened that you don't really remember. That's a very conditioning based. Fetishes are often very conditioning, whether you're aware of them is another story. Yeah.
So, can we condition maybe on that?
Yeah, oh, for sure. That's a big part of therapy for like when you're doing some of those things is you condition them with something unpleasant. Or you just take the power away, right? So like the classical conditioning thing was Pavlov and his dogs, right? You'd ring a bell and present them with food. And so every time you'd ring the bell and present the food, they would sell. But if you ring a bell and don't present the food, eventually that dog stops salivating, right? And so it's kind of like breaking the connection between the two things. And you can very much do this. Let's say you give your partner a massage and it leads to sex for 5 years, right? And so now you have this strong connection between massages and like intimacy, but then they stop doing that. Eventually you'll stop being turned on and expecting it as it relates to like that stimulus. So very, very big part of sexuality for people. Any other like thoughts or comments, questions, anything? Aphrodisiacs and anaphrodisiacs. This is an interesting topic and it's kind of controversial. A lot of people believe in the power of aphrodisiacs. There is to date no clear evidence of any substance, food, or anything that has a genuine aphrodisiac quality to it as of now, right? I'm not saying that they won't get there one day. I imagine we will. But as of right now, there is no substance or food or anything like that that tends to increase sex drive on a biological level. Now, the role of expectation plays a huge, huge factor in the idea of aphrodisiacs, right? And so if people think it will work, it might work. It's like the whole placebo effect, right? If you expect or believe something will work, it often does. But aphrodisiacs are things that are supposed to increase your capacity for sexual activity, increase your sex drive and desire for sex. There are a ton of them, bless you, that are thought to be aphrodisiacs. And it comes from the idea that bland foods would stifle masturbation and sex drive. So rich and expensive, luxurious foods would increase it. I have a video of this. It was from like a British talk show. And so it's kind of funny, some of the like cultural differences in the language. But they talk about some of the common aphrodisiacs and where the term comes from and so on. Just keep in the back of your mind again that none of them have been proven to work. Doesn't mean they're not used a lot, but none of them have actually been proven. So let me play this for you and then we could talk about it a little bit more.
If you desperately want to try and stay together, then my next guest could help rekindle your relationship. Please welcome my resident sexpert, Julie Peasgood. Just been rekindled, take it no further than that. So it's sad, isn't it, this time of year? It's so miserable outside. Is that part of it, do you think?
I think it's all part of it, and I mean, we're going to talk about aphrodisiacs today, and probably if divorce is at the door, then it might be a bit late for that. But if you're just going through a rocky time in your relationship and you do want to put a few sparks back, why not introduce some lovely suppers and use a few aphrodisiac foods?
If you're jaded in January.
You bet, very good. Make the effort.
Yes, all right. Yes. Don't get overexcited. It's only a half-naked waiter who does nothing for me.
Oh, thank you,
goodness
Tommy. He does liven up my bit, doesn't he? He really does.
Making my eyes water just looking at him. Hello, Tommy. Been on the pumpkin seeds again then, have we?
We're going to come to that, actually.
Oh, God.
Aphrodisiacs were named after Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and lust, and I think we've got a still of her Roman counterpart, Venus.
Yes,
Botticelli,
there she is.
Botticelli's Venus. It always sounds so rude, doesn't it? Botticelli's Venus. Anyway, they were generally food and drink. An aphrodisiac is something that arouses or increases sexual desire, and their origins were in healthy foods for a diet that maybe was very nutrient poor. So coming to the first thing, avocados on the list there.
Oh, yes.
Now, avocados, back in the days of the Aztecs, they called the avocado tree ahuacatl tree because ahuacatl means testicle tree. And it does bear a small resemblance, well, more than a passing resemblance to a part of the male anatomy, you see. And they thought that avocados were so potent, right, that the maidens, the Aztec maidens were not allowed to put one virginal toe outside of their huts when the avocado fruit was being gathered.
I can see
They,
why.
honestly, full of vitamin B6, potassium, and essential fatty acids.
So eat an avocado if you want to.
Absolutely, for the production of your sex hormones and a libido lift. And it's all about how you eat it. Feed your lover, dip it in balsamic vinegar.
Oh.
Go for that. Okay. Next on the list are oysters.
Hang on, I'm feeling a little lift already. But it's probably not where you intended it to be. Avocado and balsamic vinegar.
Less of which later. Now, oysters.
Remember, Alan, it's not yet 4 o'clock. It's carrying on.
Oysters.
Oh.
One of the classics. They're packed full of zinc, which is very good for the production of testosterone. Okay. And another thing about aphrodisiacs another thing about aphrodisiacs is they're foods which are deemed sensual by their shape, texture, appearance, smell,
How would
everything.
you eat an oyster then?
You just sort of like make sure it's loosened first of all, which this one is, and you just sort of lovely, really good for you.
But you're chewing it, because some people just swallow them, don't they? I think that's kind of, ooh.
I do. But they're really good. And another aphrodisiac food, asparagus. Because...
I like
Can I
asparagus.
give you those back, Tommy?
Yeah.
Do you like... Well, I'll give you an asparagus, Alan, because it's how you... They're obviously phallic in appearance. Or maybe not. They are packed full of vitamin E to keep all your bits in good working order. And another thing that will keep your bits going is chocolate. I'm moving swiftly on here. I want to introduce you to the whole range of these wonderful foods. Chocolate. Okay,
Have you watching Mrs. T?
Mrs. T, the darker the better.
Be
Okay?
very afraid tonight.
The Aztecs, again, were the first to celebrate the cocoa bean. They had riotous orgies to celebrate its harvest. And Montezuma, the emperor, reputedly drank 50 cups of liquid chocolate a day to service his harem.
No.
So he obviously got very fat, very spotty, but he did have 600 ladies to look after, so he needed lots of energy.
Fly, George.
It's full of phenylethylamine.
It'd have to be.
That's the chemical that courses through our bodies when we're newly in love, and remember, the darker the better. So that's very
Righto.
good. And something for you, Alan,
Yes.
is pumpkin seeds. Now, these again are full of zinc, and all I'm going to say about them is that it's Tommy's staple diet. So I rest my case.
Well, he's clearly had nothing else. I mean, he's in need of a square meal, isn't he? Tommy, you recommend pumpkin seeds then?
Yes, they're very crunchy. It's very good for your...
Good for your teeth?
Yes,
For your jaw.
good for masticating.
Oh, masticating.
I said masticating. Next we have pineapple juice. Pineapple's used in the homeopathic cure for impotence. And one for the ladies here. Pour me a glass as well, why not? It's good for me to... And one for the ladies here.
Yep.
Licorice, not licorice all sorts.
No.
You can buy the dark stuff from health food stores, but best of all is licorice root. Because this gives rise to very lustful urges and makes women particularly wanton. I would take some home for Mrs. T right now. Pop it in your pocket right now, Alan. And last but not least, we have 2 herbal supplements which are also stimulants. Horny goatweed.
Pardon?
Horny goatweed, they both
I've
come
been
in
in
capsules.
horticulture for 40 years. I've never heard of horny goat.
It was discovered 2,000 years ago in China by a shepherd who found that his goats couldn't keep their hooves off each other when they ate a certain weed.
Oh.
And it's been used for years as a sort of remedy for liver and kidney disorders. It's now a sexual cure-all, as is Muira puama. Muirapuama.
Right.
Now they can
But
both
they
be
look just
bought
like
from
tablets, is it?
they're from health food stores. This is extracted
Yes.
from the bark and the roots of the trees in Brazil, and it's called potency wood because it packs such a punch. Okay, it's very good for reviving a jaded appetite and getting blood flowing to all your bits. So it's psychologically and physically beneficial, and it cures baldness and rheumatism.
Wonderful, thank you. Tommy, wrap them up. Alison, brace yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, Julie Peasgood.
All right. I think a really good like introduction to some very common aphrodisiacs. Stop that. But again, when they are engaging in intercourse with each other. So the way that they got this data was by recording hundreds of couples having sex with each other and noticing the changes that happened in the body. And so it's not perfect, but it is fairly accurate, especially if we're looking at male-female like sexuality. But they talked about two things that are kind of constantly changing when we engage in any kind of sexual activity: vasocongestion and myotonia. Vasocongestion is when parts of your body are filling up with blood, right? When you are aroused, particular parts of the body will become engorged with blood. The penis, all the shafts and like cavernous bodies and spongy bodies in the penis fill with blood to allow for an erection. For women, the labia, especially the labia minora, tend to fill with blood to become more sensitive and cause lubrication to occur. So we see a lot of vasocongestion occurring in the body. And then we also see myotonia, muscle tension changing in the stomach, in the abdomen, in the uterus for women. So there's a lot of like elements of physical changes occurring when we're engaging in any kind of sexuality with another person, whether it's sex, like traditional coitus sex, which we're talking about here, or other. But they talked about 4 phases that men and women tend to go through when they're engaging in any kind of sexual activity: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. Okay, so everyone goes through these 4 stages, but there are differences in how, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Excitement is that kind of, we could think about like maybe as foreplay. It's the activity before like sexual intercourse. It begins with a lot of vasocongestion, filling with blood, lubrication of the vaginal walls. Sometimes people get what's called a sex flush as a result of this stage. Like as all of the parts of their body are filling with blood, their chest sometimes will turn bright red, or up their neck. Some people blush naturally in their face. That's a little different, but it tends to be on your chest as like those blood vessels fill with blood. So this is that part where you're becoming aroused, you're turned on, you get maybe an erection in men, lubrication in the like vaginal walls and labia for women. Plateau would be kind of like the bulk of sexual activity, right? So blood flow continuing to build and prepare for orgasm. It's kind of that longer period of time where you're engaging in sex that hopefully leads to orgasm. Right? Orgasm being that kind of peak experience that you would have where everything reaches a peak and then calms down after. They studied in their experiments the G-spot, or the Grafenberg spot. If we want to get really formal, the G-spot, technical name Grafenberg. Nobody calls it that. After the doctor who coined it. Can you imagine that's your hallmark in life? What are you known for? Well, I invented the G-spot, right? The Grafenberg spot. A very commonly stimulated spot that leads to orgasm in women, along with like clitoral stimulation. But orgasm would be that peak where everything kind of reaches a climax and then kind of falls from there. And the falling we call resolution. That's when blood flow reduces, muscle tension reduces, and everything kind of resets back to normal. Now, one interesting difference between men and women is that men have what's called a refractory period. For men, there's a period of time following orgasm and ejaculation where they cannot have another orgasm. Now, when you're young, this could be very, very brief, like seconds to minutes. But when you're older, like men in their 60s and 70s, this could be days, right? Where they're not able to build enough blood flow to get an erection and reach orgasm. So it's typically like minutes to hours, but the older you get for men, it can be days to even weeks. Very uncommon to be weeks. It's usually a matter of days or hours. So everyone goes through these 4 stages according to them, but there's a lot of variability between men and women in these 4 stages. And so if you look at this, there's some sexual differences in response between men and women. And I love this. This will stick with me forever. Like I had a male student in my class 10 years ago who was like, of course that's women. Look how complicated it is. Right. And I always think that the second I see it, right? Women tend to be a little more complicated in their sexual responses. Or we can frame that nicer and say there's more variability in the way that women tend to respond. Men tend to follow a very common pattern of excitement, plateau, orgasm, resolution, right? And then maybe another orgasm and like shortly after, depending on their refractory period. Women, on the other hand, tend to have a lot more variability, right? They might follow that traditional pattern. They might never reach orgasm, right? And this could depend on stimulation of their body or whatnot. Or they might have multiple orgasms, right? Women are capable of multiple orgasms during sex. Men are not. Even if they seem shortly like distanced, men have separate cycles. Women can have multiple orgasms. So the big difference is there's more variability for women. Men have a refractory period where they have to like have everything recharge and rebuild in terms of blood flow. And women can experience multiple orgasms. Now, if you look at these 2 charts, you can see how that could cause problems in like traditional male-female like intercourse, right? And so sometimes understanding this can be helpful for reducing some of those issues. There was a comedy skit. It's old now. It's like a Jeff Foxworthy comedy skit about this, but I'll play it for you. There's like a 30-second little clip in there kind of talking about this a little bit. And I thought it was funny. So I'll play it for you. You find it. Diesel engines and bottle rockets, he called it. Hurry. Didn't push the button. And warm up. But then tends to last longer versus men tend to be a little quicker in their sexual responses as well. So again, this can sometimes cause issues between couples in the way that they're engaging in sexuality with each other. But I think understanding it and being aware of it can be a little bit helpful. Any thoughts or anything here? Right? Again, women more complicated or more variability. That sounds much nicer. We'll go with it. Computer is having a Wednesday here. Okay, there we go. The book talks about a ton of sexual behaviors. This chapter is filled with sexual behaviors and all sorts of images. I think kind of an interesting chapter to read. They talk a lot about celibacy as one very common sexual behavior. Celibacy has changed in the way that it's been defined over time. We tend to define celibacy now as kind of not engaging in sexual behavior. Right? So you can have complete celibacy or partial celibacy. Complete would mean that you don't engage in any kind of sexual behavior, either with other people or like masturbating or anything with yourself either, right? So complete is like no sexual behavior whatsoever. Partial might be like whatever you decided to be. So maybe I'm going to engage in like masturbation or like oral sex or like manual sex, but not, like actual sex itself or actual coitus. And a lot of people make choices to be celibate, right? Whether it's partial or complete. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Religion's a big one. Religion plays a big role in things like celibacy and feelings around masturbation and sex with other people. Moral beliefs, maybe you are waiting for the right person. Like people will sometimes say, I'm waiting for the right person. I'm not going to have sex until I'm married or until I find the right person. You want to learn about other parts of yourself and put that on hold. Maybe it's health and you're afraid of STIs or STDs because there are a lot of them out there. There's a lot of reasons why people choose this, but it is a relatively common like sexual choice or behavior to either engage in only partial or like complete celibacy. And a lot of groups on this as well. A lot of like interesting like online and social groups for support for people who make this decision. I also talk a lot about sexual dreams and fantasies. Dreams and fantasies play a big part in your level of arousal. And interesting, we were kind of talking about this a little bit with like the movie. Do fantasies count as cheating or not? Right. And that would be kind of an interesting one to think about. These are mental experiences that are like in your mind, right? Your imagination. Maybe you are imagining what like sex would be like with your partner or with somebody else, right? And they can oftentimes be a big source of pleasure and arousal. A lot of people, traditionally women, but a lot of people, the mental aspect of it is huge. If they're not emotionally in the mood, right, or like mentally in the mood, that can prohibit them from engaging in any kind of sexual behavior. So dreams and fantasies can help be a source of pleasure. They can help overcome anxiety. It might be a way that you get to express some of that sexual behavior that's not always accepted. Maybe you have fantasies of things that are a little taboo or forbidden. And so you get to kind of engage in that without actually having to do it in real life. So dreams and fantasies tend to play a big role. Again, I love this picture on the bottom, right? Like mad at him for his fantasy. And it could be, again, that fantasies are considered cheating by some. It depends on your line, as we talked a little bit about last time. Masturbation is another big one, right? When it comes to sexual behaviors, right? So stimulating your own genitals for sexual pleasure. Sometimes we call manual sex, right? Whether that's by yourself or with another person. I think this one gives us like one last opportunity for good old slang. We haven't done slang terms in a while. So I want you to find a few people around you. So like 2, 3, 4 people, whatever's easy. Write it down because I hope you'll share. What are all the slang terms you can come up with for masturbate? Right, write them down so that you can share. I'll give you a few minutes and then we'll talk about it together.
Yeah, so you wanna, I can put down you guys. For next meeting. I have heading this.
You have write them down so you can share. I mean,
Finding you. Let's take them down. I don't want to see. Making walkers. Doing a Meg Brown. Rolling the
It's so
playing with the John.
Oh, that's. Oh, yeah. Celebrating on Saturday. Oh, that's actually.
This one. Taking my mind. What backing up the
Sex.
bang yourself?
You say Jack.
Off the balloon. Double clicking the mouse. Double clicking the mouse. What, the 16? Yeah.
Not my fault.
Oh, yeah. Go fishing with your mom.
Oh, yes.
That's a beaver. Make it snap. Painting the ceiling? No.
I give you a couple more minutes. and then we'll talk about it.
Playing air guitar.
That's honestly, it's only. This is so.
Playing tug of war with the cyclops.
It's very specific. Yeah.
Amy? I know. Why?
Makes me not want to. Not one for them, no.
The 5-fingered hand. What about wax on, wax off? No. Oh, wax.
It was just a serious brain.
It's not about a favorite pastime. That's the one I. Oh. 101. No, that's basically that. I got me. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like just very.
Badgering the weight. Be your own.
All right, so I see the groups that look done and I see some that are still talking, but I've heard little bits around the room. There's a lot of terms here.
Brushing up on your typing. Brushing up on your typing skill.
Oh, nice, right? Careful if somebody says that, right? Does anyone want to read their list? Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
You do it. I typed it.
Yeah.
I have a list, but I think I personally think that it was scratches.
Some of them are so bad. Like, that's actually not that bad. So, does anyone have a small one? Yeah, I do. You look excited. Let's go.
So we have beat your meat, rub the kitty, shoot the bee, maintain, jerking off, playing with the kitty, caressing soft, polishing the pearl diving, taking a trip downtown, taking a trip to Pleasure Town, orbiting Venus, diddling, swimming the clitoris, casting a rod, stick shift, and game toasting.
All right, that was a good list. Anybody else? Yeah, go for it.
Maybe just trolling the playing to Johnson, banging yourself, Donald Trump firing his apprentice.
What was that last one?
Donald Trump firing his apprentice. Fiction, friction, fucking yourself, getting trigger happy, holding your sausage hostage, jacking off your knee, painting the ceiling, playing air guitar naked, slapping the salami, stroking it, turning Japanese, two-finger tango, wax on, wax off, basting the ham, barking up the wrong tree.
All right, I like it, right? Some of those I've never heard before, right? And I don't know if I can get a few of them out of my head, yeah. You're like, I have to add yeah.
We got me jerking off, waking off, getting off, playing with the kitty, finger painting, walking the wall, jacking off, chilling off, 5-on-1, flicking the beam, spanking the monkey, petting the kitty, rubbing one out, going number 3.
All right, I like it, right? Anybody else? I don't want to rob you of your chance if you were very excited to share. Right, there's so many, right? And it's interesting, a lot of them are like very male dominated, right? But there's a lot of female ones that I heard today too. So this traditionally is something that we tend to think of with men. There was a quote, right, where like 98% of people masturbate and the other 2% lie, right? Or something like that. This is a very common behavior. A lot of people engage in masturbation on a lot of levels. Obviously, there's a whole like spectrum of that. But it's something that's also been very traditionally condemned, right? Especially by the church, right? A lot of connection between religion and like condemning masturbation. If you go back, I had it here, the church, oh, I just lost it. Okay. The Vatican declared that masturbation is intrinsically and seriously disordered as an act. And then in the 90s, added that it was morally unacceptable. This is something that is traditionally by the church kind of condemned as a behavior that you shouldn't do. So oftentimes people have very complicated feelings or maybe even shame about masturbating, but it is a very common behavior. There's also a lot of myths and like erroneous health concerns about masturbating, right? And some of them I wrote down that if you masturbate too much, you'll go blind. It'll give you acne. That people who masturbate have hairy palms or hairy hands. That is not true. That you could vibrate it off. That it's more difficult to orgasm. There is some truth to that one. Use it or lose it. Only boys masturbate. Every time you masturbate, a kitten dies. It's a form of cheating and you'll go to hell if you masturbate. Those are the most common myths and erroneous like ideas. The one that has a little bit of like merit to it. So like what we've learned is that masturbation isn't necessarily harmful. But let's say that as like you're using a lot of toys when you're masturbating, maybe you're using like vibrators or something like that. It might be harder to reach orgasm like through like intercourse or through like manual stimulation if you become accustomed to only reaching orgasm through like a vibrator, for example. It might be harder for a partner who doesn't have the speed that a vibrator would have to reach the same like level of intensity. So if people are doing this a lot, it can make your sensitivity threshold like so low that you might have a difficult time orgasming with a partner. That's one way that it might be problematic. But for the most part, we don't consider this to be a harmful behavior, even though there are a lot of like moral, religious, and ethical things behind it. The number one reason that people masturbate is to relieve tension, right? To relieve tension that has built up. Maybe it's to help deal with discrepancies in sex drive with a partner, right? Or maybe it's just for pleasure or to relax or unwind. There's a lot of reasons that people do this. The number one being like relieving tension. And we talked about this earlier, if you're wondering why cornflakes and graham crackers are up here. Really common idea for a lot of years that your diet influenced your desire to masturbate. And so for a lot of years, they tried to promote, the church tried to promote bland food and bland diet to reduce masturbation tendencies. And the graham cracker was actually developed to help stifle masturbation. Not the current graham crackers that have like cinnamon and like chocolate and are really like sweet and rich and whatever. But like the old traditional like unflavored graham cracker and cornflakes were actually developed to help stifle masturbation. And this also drives the idea of aphrodisiacs, that rich and like kind of more like rich foods could then increase sex drive. Any comments, thoughts, questions, anything else here? I love all the slang. Thank you. Right? We hadn't done that in a while. It was time, right? Any thoughts or anything here? A few more sexual behaviors. Kissing, big part of sexuality for a lot of people. The Kama Sutra talks about 32 different types of kisses. I don't know if we could actually say that that's true, but it was a very common like discussion for a time. Kissing tends to be a big part of sexual activity for people. It kind of a big part of like foreplay and like early sexual activities with others. I found like a kissing montage. I'll play it for you. Why not? Right? You want to watch people kiss for a minute here? We can do that. But again, tends to be for a lot of people. Obviously, touching, we talked about touch being kind of like that cornerstone of sexuality for a lot of people. So these are more elements of like sexual behaviors and foreplay. A lot of interesting attitudes cross-culturally about kissing and like what types of kisses are more like permissible and what they mean and so on. But it tends to be a big part, right? And a lot of people having their first kiss at a very young age. It's not uncommon for people who are like 10, 11, 12 to like be kissing others for the first time. That frightens me a little bit, having 3 girls that are 9 and 11. But that's, we're not there yet. Though my daughter did come home yesterday. It's the most random. My 9-year-old came home yesterday and she's like, so I've decided that I'm non-binary and I'm attracted to this other person and I think I'd like to kiss them. And I was like, that's a lot to unpack. And then 2 minutes later, she was all like, and what does 69 mean? I'm like, I was like, okay, wait, back up. This is a 9-year-old, right? I was like, okay, I'm fine with the first part. I'm glad that you're non-binary. But what does that mean to you? And she's like, I don't really know, but I like it. Okay, so we had to talk about that for a bit. And then I was like, so who told you about 69? And she's like, well, I know what it is. I was like, you do? What is it? And she's like, well, it's like a thing where 2 people do a thing together at the same time. I was like, that's fairly, that's fairly accurate. I was like, do you know any more? And she's like, well, yeah. I'm like, okay, tell me, right? And she's like, no, like, I don't really understand the other part of it. What's the other part of it? She's like, well, they're like touching in multiple places. You're not wrong. It's like, you're wrong. I'm like, you're 9. What do you know? No, you're supposed to be like, no. And so I had to like get the weirdest conversations with my 9-year-olds yesterday of being non-binary, kissing, and what 69 means, right? Anyway, they're getting older on me. I can't handle it, right? It's been a rough week with my children as far as like not believing in holidays and like talking about 69. Like it's a lot. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Oh, yeah. It's one of the covers of yeah. You're welcome, right? Yeah, there's one of their covers. There's a lot of hand. So anyway, random story for you, but it came up in my mind as we were talking about that, which kind of leads us into this anyway, right? Of oral genital stimulation. But this is another very common like sexual behavior, and we very rarely use these terms. Like you very rarely hear the terms cunnilingus and fellatio, but that is the technical name for both of these activities. Cunnilingus would be oral stimulation on like the vulva or the clitoris or the labia, on like the vaginal opening of a woman, and fellatio being stimulation of like the penis or the scrotum orally. So again, we don't tend to use those terms, but that is the technical name. And I'm not showing my daughter the picture on the top right up there of what 69ing would be, but a lot of very common behavior, right? Very common, especially in younger people who haven't engaged in sex yet, tending to do a lot of like oral or like manual stimulation. A lot of discomfort here too, right? A lot of people have qualms about not feeling like, they're clean enough or attractive enough, or like, a lot of like discomfort in that. And it is very important to have a level of cleanliness when you're also adding like oral sex into the mix, right? Not a bad idea to make sure you are clean. It reduces a lot of like risks of like STIs and infections, not completely, but it minimizes some of that. And we talked about this a little bit before too, that the things that a person puts in their body can very directly affect the taste of their like ejaculate for men and for women, right? That if you're eating a lot of like, coffee and alcohol, cigarettes, or like using a lot of substances like that, then your ejaculate can be very bitter, sweet if you're doing a lot of like sweeter foods, pineapple and things like that. So the things that you put into your system can directly affect the taste of your ejaculate. It usually takes about 24 hours of the things that you put in your body. But these are very common like sexual acts, right, that a lot of people do engage in as part of their like sexual like repertoire. Anal stimulation, a little less common. It's estimated about 25% of people engage in like anal like stimulation of some kind. It's got a lower prevalence and a higher health risk than most sexual behaviors. This is one of the riskier sexual behaviors to engage in, just because the anus like does have a lot of like bacteria, and it's a place where, waste is leaving the body. So cleanliness becomes even more important here, because you have a higher risk of like infections and bacteria and HIV, because there's a lot of ripping that can occur in the like anal like region. Like it's a very sensitive thin skin, and if it rips, it creates tiny little openings in which like STIs could be passed. So it can be kind of a dangerous activity if not practiced safely. Analingus is oral stimulation of the anus. Again, even more important to have like cleanliness be part of that. Another kind of interesting thing, if you're looking at these pictures, right, these are like anal toys. Right? There's a lot of toys like as part of like anal stimulation. And what I want you to notice with them all is they all have a very wide base to them. And that's very purposeful. Right. The reason for that is the anus is very strong, like muscular qualities to it. And so if you're not careful, things can get pulled up into the anus and get stuck. And you hear nightmare stories of people going to the emergency room with this all the time. I have a friend who's a doctor who likes to tell me these stories. I love it. I think it's hilarious. A hamster. No, you just dropped your drink. Right? He told me like 2 months ago. A man came into so I'm like, I don't know why. He's like, I didn't find out what happened, but anyway. But the reason for these wide bases is that so that doesn't happen. Same thing with like the anal beads that are up here. They usually have something to hold on to because it can get sucked up into the anus and be very difficult, if not impossible, to remove on your own. All right. So of all the sexual behaviors, this one is one that requires a lot of caution. Right, because of just the nature of that part of the body, you have to be a little more careful. It is considered a little bit higher risk. So not a bad idea to use things like lubricants and to really practice cleanliness as well. Questions or thoughts or anything here? Right? You're like, no, all right, but maybe. I mentioned the term coitus. Right. Coitus is sexual union between a male and a female. It's the technical term for like penis, vagina, intercourse, coitus. We don't tend to use this term very often either, but it is kind of the technical term and like the standard of sexuality. I think we have time. Let's do one last slang, right? Slang for sex, right? I'm gonna give you just like 5 minutes, but come up with all the slang terms that you can for coitus, for sex. Nope, it could be any kind of sex. Totally fine.
Right. But horizontal restriction. Yeah. Right.
Okay, so start here. Make the juice with 2 bags. Shaking the sheets. Get it on. Hammer to the hole. Let's do it. Getting it. I'm just getting the. And it says getting a food. Whatever. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
It sounds so scandalous.
I know. Once ours is salad. Oh, no. And then there's another one.
So just like 2 more things to do for so loud. Go down.
Jumping around.
Riding a hot dogs. I don't like this one.
That sounds gross.
We're gonna go into bed.
Not swallowing. Not or not. Just not. No.
Oh. Oh, seriously.
Food related? We make squash sprouts and then cucumber, putting the bread.
That would have hurt.
What, the hot tea?
And then said voice to see.
Oh my God.
All right, like 1 more minute, 1 more minute.
Turning butter. The donut, the cream donut. Planting parsnips, toasting the bagels. Making, what about making steak? Double clicking the mouse. The bacon.
So did anybody want to For this, yeah, I had some interesting ones up here.
Feeding them. Oh, wait, not that one.
Oh, it's masturbation.
Yeah. Smash, thirsty, sneaky link, clapping cheeks, gyat, make love, horizontal refreshment, riding the pony, get laid, shaking of the sheets, getting a, and then you insert the candy bar name. And then make whoopee, make it cream pie, do the deed of darkness, funny business, getting down, tap back, getting lucky, a bit of how's your father, shag, not swallowing the kids, rat, sore, smash, putting the bread in the oven, having a hot beef injection, sending out for sushi, playing hide the sausage, filling the cream donut, glazing the donut, passing the gravy, making bacon, and then hot dog.
It's a lot of food references at the end there, right? They're like, all right, anybody else? Do you want to read yours? I would have been disappointed. in you.
Hide the finger, fucking, finger banging, scissor sisters, take a ride on the disco stick, joyride, I don't remember what that says. Pleasure town, diddle, the acts of sin, deflowering, Netflix and chill, boinking, fornicating, acts of darkness, the dark arts, bumping uglies, smash, ravaging, plowing, doing the dirty, jumping boats, tap that, shagging, nailing, jackhammering, driving Miss Daisy, playing Hello Kitty, lip service, fanny crunching, carpet munching, clam digging, consummating, rocking the boat, and making whoopee.
Impressive, right? Anybody else? What was that, right? That was a lot, right? So lots of slang for this. Again, we very rarely, but this is the technical term for like male, female intercourse, right? Is coitus. Again, very rarely used. We only have a few minutes left up, so I'll let you kind of look these over. There's some terms that the book uses to talk about like same-sex behaviors that tend to be a little bit more common, and then tantric intercourse. I forgot I wanted to remind you about this. I was excited to hear your song. So I want to, just in my last like couple of minutes that I have before we run out of time, don't forget that the second exam is on Monday. Okay, so exam number 2 is on Monday. If you are on Canvas, the exam, you're obviously taking it under the little quizzes tab right here. It'll open up at 12:01 a.m. on Monday and close at 11:59 p.m. on Monday. So just anytime Monday, you obviously have this time free, so you could take it now, or you could take it earlier or later, but make sure it's done by just before midnight on Monday night. There's a study guide that is here for you. Everything that's on the study guide will be on the exam. I'd like to point out, and I mentioned this to my class earlier, so we leave on Saturday. So I'm not taking my computer with me, so you won't have a score for the short answer questions until I get back. So I'm sorry for that delay. I try to be really on it with grading, but the internet on cruise ships is shamefully bad, even if you pay for it. And I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to grade for 12 hours. I'm going to eat for 12. So forgive me for that. The other thing, so that's Monday. Wednesday, you will have a short assignment that is on chapter, I think it's 14, looking at like disorders of sex. And so you're going to be turning in that on Canvas. So it will pop up on Wednesday. I'll send out announcements for both. I've already put them in Canvas to go out automatically. If you have something happen with the exam, please email me. Just if you don't hear back from me, don't panic. I just don't have internet. Right. So I hope you all have a wonderful week next week. I won't see you next week, and then the week after that is spring break. So I won't see you for a little while. I will eat something for each of you because I'm so considerate like that. So wait for that moment next week where you're like, sponsor my screen. Have a wonderful week. I'll hang out if you have any questions, and I'll see you after spring break.